April 9th in history. In 1241, the Mongol horde swept into Poland. A vast steppe army under Baydar and Orda Khan rode west, leaving devastated cities in their wake. On April 9th, Duke Henry II's Polish-German army was crushed near Legnica. Henry was killed, his severed head paraded on a spear before the city walls. The road to Western Europe lay open, yet the Mongols turned back. News of Great Khan Egedei's death pulled them east, sparing Europe an uncertain fate. In 1609, the Dutch Republic and Spain had been locked in brutal war for 40 years. Armies clashed across the Low Countries as the Dutch fought for independence. On April 9th, diplomats gathered in Antwerp and signed the 12 Years' Truce. Spain, for the first time, recognized the Dutch Republic as a sovereign nation. The truce unleashed the Dutch Golden Age. Trade, science, and art flourished. Rembrandt, Vermeer, and the Dutch East India Company all emerged in its wake. In 1626, Francis Bacon, philosopher, statesman, and father of the scientific method, roamed the snow-dusted hills of Highgate, England, consumed by a restless curiosity. Bacon stopped to stuff a freshly slaughtered chicken with snow, testing whether cold could preserve meat. Days later, he was dead. A chill turned fatal, the experiment his last. Bacon's method, observe, hypothesize, test, became the backbone of modern science. He died as he lived, chasing proof. His ideas outlasted every empire of his era. In 1682, French explorer Salle led an expedition down the Mississippi River, pushing deep into unknown territory on behalf of King Louis XIV. On April 9th, Salle planted a cross and French royal column at the Gulf of Mexico, formally claiming the entire river basin, naming it Louisiana for his king. Louisiana became France's crown jewel in North America, later sold to the United States in 1803, doubling the young nation's size forever. In 1816, Philadelphia's black worshippers faced open discrimination inside white Methodist churches, forced to separate pews, denied communion, stripped of dignity. On April 9, 1816, Richard Allen gathered black Methodist leaders in Philadelphia, formally establishing the African Methodist Episcopal Church, America's first independent black denomination. The AME Church became a pillar of abolitionism, education, and civil rights, a sanctuary of power and purpose for Black Americans across 2 centuries. In 1865, 4 years of brutal civil war had torn America apart. Over 620,000 soldiers lay dead as Confederate forces made their final retreat through Virginia. On April 9th, General Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Grant offered generous terms. Soldiers could keep their horses and go home. The surrender ended the deadliest war in American history and sealed the abolition of slavery, reshaping the nation's identity forever. In 1867, the United States stood at a crossroads. Secretary of State William Seward eyed a vast frozen territory stretching across the North Pacific, Russian Alaska. On April 9th, the Senate ratified the treaty purchasing Alaska from Russia for just $7.2 million, roughly 2 cents per acre. Critics immediately mocked it as Seward's folly. The folly proved visionary. Gold rushes, vast oil fields, and strategic Arctic position transformed Alaska into one of history's greatest bargains, America's last frontier. In 1917, the Western Front was locked in brutal stalemate. Canadian soldiers massed in the frozen trenches of northern France, preparing to storm Vimy Ridge, a fortress that had broken British and French armies. On Easter Monday morning, all 4 Canadian divisions advanced together behind a creeping barrage. Soldiers carried detailed maps and had rehearsed on replica terrain. By day's end, Vimy Ridge was theirs. Over 10,000 Canadians fell taking Vimy Ridge. Yet the victory, won as one united national force, forged a proud Canadian identity that echoes to this day. In 1939, Washington, D.C. buzzed with racial tension. African-American contralto Marian was denied a stage simply because of her race. On Easter Sunday, 75,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial as Anderson's powerful voice soared across the open mall, a defiant triumph over injustice. That concert became a cornerstone of the civil rights movement, proving that art and courage together could crack the walls of segregation. In 1942, the Philippines fell under siege. 76,000 American and Filipino soldiers on the Bataan Peninsula faced overwhelming Japanese forces after months of desperate, exhausting resistance. On April 9th, the garrison surrendered, the largest capitulation in U.S. history. Prisoners were then forced to march 65 miles to a prison camp in brutal heat, thousands dying along the way. The Bataan Death March became a defining symbol of wartime atrocity. It steeled American resolve across the Pacific and is honored every year by veterans and descendants who remember its victims. In 1959, America was locked in a fierce space race with the Soviet Union. Cold War tensions ran high as both nations raced to conquer the cosmos. On April 9th, NASA unveiled 7 extraordinary test pilots as America's first astronauts. The Mercury 7 stood before the world, instantly becoming national heroes. These 7 men defined an era of American ambition. Their courage launched a generation of space exploration that carried humanity to the moon. In 1969, Britain raced to lead the supersonic age. At Filton near Bristol, engineers had spent years crafting the most advanced passenger aircraft ever built. On April 9th, Chief Test Pilot Brian Trubshaw lifted Concorde 002 into the sky. The sleek aircraft roared aloft, 5 weeks after France's prototype had flown. Concorde entered service in 1976, crossing the Atlantic in under 4 hours. It remains history's only sustained supersonic passenger airliner. In 2003, U.S. forces swept into Baghdad after weeks of fierce fighting, bringing the decades-long rule of Saddam Hussein to its final hours. On April 9th, Marines looped a cable around the giant statue. With a slow, grinding pull, Saddam's iron likeness crashed to the ground. The image circled the globe instantly. Yet the fall of a statue did not mean peace. Years of conflict would follow, reshaping the entire Middle East.